Welcome to our interview today with Gwen Moncrieff. Gwen is a social worker and a community care assessor based in the Cambridgeshire area. And she has a particular interest in a particular type of problem which we don't hear a great deal about in the UK. It's called Fetal Alcohol Syndrome, FAS. Gwen is Canadian and is very aware of the fact that this problem is much more recognized on the other side of the Atlantic, and wanted to just say something today about trying to raise our awareness about it and to look at some of the implications of that. Good morning to you, Gwen.
Good morning.
Hi. Can you just say a little bit, first of all, about what Fetal Alcohol Syndrome, or FAS, actually is? Because I'm sure a lot of listeners are not necessarily going to have heard of it before.
Yeah, Fetal Alcohol Syndrome is something that's caused when a woman drinks alcohol when she's pregnant. And there's also there's FAS, and then there's also something called, which used to be called FAE. It's now called Alcohol-Related Neurological Disorder, ARND. So fetal alcohol is caused when a woman drinks, and the FAS diagnosis comes about when if the woman has drunk in the first few days really, of her pregnancy, usually long before she knows she's pregnant, and the child develops as the fetus is being created, the body comes together to form, the two sides come together. And if there's drinking between, I think it's about day 14 and about day 28, thereabouts, if she's drinking at that time, the face will not form correctly. And so to get the full identification as an FAS diagnosis, the child would have to have a certain facial deformities. Usually the head is considerably smaller. There's often changes to the eyes. The ears can be malformed, and the top lip, the ridge in the middle between the nose, can become very flattened, and the lip becomes very, very flattened, and there also has to be an awareness that the mother has been drinking. Those are kind of the four or five diagnostic tools. And the interesting thing is that if the woman drank for the 10 days before that period and then took 2 weeks off, her child would not have those features, so could not be diagnosed as FAS. But even if she drank every day through the rest of her pregnancy and the child was extremely damaged, he or she would always be diagnosed as FAE or suffering with AR, alcohol-related neurological damage. So those facial features are very key.
What about? I mean, is there any cognitive or developmental impact?
Yeah, and it's a wide spectrum depending on how much alcohol at what time is happening. So if there's a lot of alcohol intake in that really critical early period, then other things like the corpus callosum, they found that the corpus callosum, which is the piece of the brain that links the left and the right hemispheres, is actually much smaller. And they think is very connected to people making, sort of linking action to reaction. And that people cannot figure things out because their brain is just not working very well. There's also all kinds of problems all down the center line if there's drinking in that early time.
So how
like heart, kidneys.
How does this tend to manifest itself? I mean, what should we be looking out for in both children and adults?
Well, I guess that's the thing, is it's really broad. The children that have got the facial features tend to be quite disabled in lots of ways, but for the ones that are less disabled, where it's invisible, there's all the behavioral stuff. They're now in Canada. They're now, and the States, research is showing that they're tying ADHD, ADD, problems with maths and problems reading are extremely high in children with fetal alcohol stuff. So all the behavioral stuff, the stuff that teachers really struggle with, the things that prisons really struggle with, people who hurt people without having any capacity to understand that, to place themselves in the other person's shoes, kind of thing.
Right. So empathy problem.
Empathy. Yeah, the empathy issue is a big problem. They're just not able to make connections, and that's to do with the early development of the brain.
Right.
The forebrain is a lot smaller.
Right.
So it's very profound disability, which is completely preventable. So
right. So you're saying that, I mean, from the sound of it, this is something which is recognized fairly well on the other side of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. And in Europe. And
in Europe.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And why do you think it's not recognized as much in the UK?
No, I think there's just a different. There's a different attitude here about drinking.
Right.
It's quite well published.
Right.
And there's a big difference here about kind of trying to be just as big a drinker as the guys. That's a big problem.
Right.
But also, to be really clear, I mean, Canada also has its problems with drinking, and the place that it really had kind of a laboratory where they had First Nations people, Native Indian people, who drank a lot and had drunk for generations since we had taken over their country, basically. And they started realizing in the 60s and the 70s the difficulties with alcohol and the problems that were showing up in these children, and how they just simply were such massive differences and such massive destruction of the brain. And so Canada and the States got on board because they had this right in front of them, whereas England doesn't have sort of a set population that they affect.
Sure. But it sounds very interesting, because obviously we're very familiar with these types of behavioral and cognitive problem, and this obviously is an angle on this which many people won't have come across before.
Yeah.
I mean, just to ask you, first of all, for people who are listening to this, what should they do? What would you recommend to them that they did if they are, as a result of listening to this?
I guess that I would hope that they would look up online, because there's lots of information online.
Right.
Fetal alcohol. You get a lot more information if you spell it without the O. So if it's Fetal, you get a lot more information. I'm also hoping that agencies or people will pick up some training on this for professionals, because it affects everybody. It affects teachers, it affects prison wardens, it affects police, it affects probation officers. Everybody's having to deal with these kids who are the invisible kids.
You said something about it being preventable.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that if a child, if a woman who herself has symptoms of fetal alcohol syndrome, so her mother was a drinker and she has some deficits herself, if she does not drink, they have found that her child, as long as she doesn't drink at all during her pregnancy, her child will be born perfectly normal.
Wow.
There is, of course, a conflict with that, though, because if you've got a mom who cannot understand the link between a baby's cry and needing to be looked after, then social services often gets involved, because the moms are not capable of looking after their perfectly normal children.
Sure.
So there's all those connections. But yeah, it's not reversible. It's absolutely permanent. Oh, the other thing, even though it's a permanent disability, I guess what happens is, as the fetus is growing, the alcohol in the system actually burns the growing edges of the cells.
Right.
So brain connections are not made. And but they have found in Canada and the States that these children, if they are diagnosed early, then there are many systems over there that are there to support the parents and to actually do kind of specialized training for the parents so that they can understand that when their child is reacting in a certain way, it may just be that they simply don't have the brain connections to make those leaps of intellect. So, but they're doing some early teaching and some very early teaching, both with the parents but also with the children. And it doesn't ever bring the child, it doesn't cure the issue, but it improves the prognosis of the child being able to function a little bit better, a little bit more successfully, particularly in terms of relationships.
Sure. And if any of our listeners have a client who is pregnant, irrespective of whatever context they're seeing them in, I assume this doesn't just apply to people working in the alcohol and addiction sphere.
No.
What should they be saying to the client about this?
Well, it's interesting because for a long time the UK's ruling was that having one drink every once in a while was okay, but in actual fact they're starting to find more and more that even minimal drinkers, the children are showing some behavioral issues and some connection issues, being able to connect with people, so that empathy thing, even in very minimal drinking. So it's really recommended that if as soon as the parent knows they're pregnant, to stop drinking.
Right, altogether.
And, yeah,
okay.
But it also ties into the whole thing of the whole idea of that if a woman is looking at getting pregnant, then she should probably get the alcohol well out of her system before she starts trying.
Okay, well that's really interesting, Gwen, and I think we ourselves here at SDS will be interested in canvassing people's views on it and inviting comment. For anybody people that are listening and would like to pass some comment or suggest some ideas, or if you're interested in training in this particular area, if you'd like to contact SDS on info@skillsdevelopment.co.uk. That's info@skillsdevelopment.co.uk. And if you just mark your email FAS, and we'll take it from there. And thanks very much indeed, Gwen. Thanks for your time, and thanks for that very interesting information in an area which I'm sure most of us are totally ignorant of. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.